For 20 years, I kept his name locked in my heart, a secret even from myself. I was 22 when I first met him, my mentor, a man whose quiet words and steady gaze made me feel seen in a way I'd never known. He was 20 years older, married, untouchable, a line I swore I'd never cross. But every glance, every moment his hand lingered when he passed me a book, it burned into me, like a spark that refused to die, a fire I couldn't extinguish no matter how hard I tried. I told myself it was nothing, just a young woman's fleeting obsession, a childish crush I'd outgrow with time and distance. But deep down, I knew it was more, something deeper, something that took root in me and never let go. I carried him with me, through every choice, every relationship, every quiet night when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what might have been. His face would flicker in my mind, unbidden, his voice echoing in my ears, soft and deliberate, like a song I couldn't forget. I'd push it away, ashamed of how much space he still occupied, ashamed of how I'd let a single year shape so much of my life. Then, last month, I saw him again. He stood across that crowded room, older but unmistakable, his eyes the same as they were 2 decades ago, deep, searching, heavy with something I'd never dared name. And when he spoke, his voice low, trembling, he said the words I'd dreamed of and dreaded for 20 years. I loved you too. What do you do when the one you love can never be yours, but they confess they loved you too? I'm not sure I have the answer. I'm not sure I ever will. But let me tell you how it happened, how a single moment unraveled everything I thought I'd buried, how it broke open a wound I'd spent 2 decades trying to heal. I was 22, fresh out of college, drowning in my own uncertainty. The world felt too big, too chaotic, and I felt too small, like I'd never find my place in it. I'd graduated with a degree in English, but no real direction, just a vague hope that words, stories, poems, anything, might save me from the aimlessness that clung to me like damp air. That's when I walked into his classroom. It was a small liberal arts college, the kind with ivy-covered walls and creaky wooden floors, where every room smelled faintly of old books and chalk dust. The lecture hall was small, intimate, with tall windows that let in slants of golden light in the late afternoon. He wasn't like the other professors. He didn't lecture with arrogance or demand attention with grand gestures. He didn't pace the room or raise his voice to make a point. He spoke softly, deliberately, like every word was a gift he'd chosen just for you, like he was confiding something sacred. His name was Daniel, and he taught literature, poetry, mostly, the kind that made your chest tighten with its beauty and its pain. He had this way of reading it, his voice curling around the words like they were fragile, like they might break if he wasn't careful. I'd sit in the back, pretending to take notes, my pen hovering over the page, but really, I was watching him. The way his hands moved when he spoke, expressive but controlled, like he was shaping the air into something tangible. The way his eyes seemed to see right through you, not in a way that made you feel exposed, but in a way that made you feel known. He was in his 40s then, married, with a daughter not much younger than me. I knew that from the start. I saw the gold band on his finger, glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights of his office. I noticed how he mentioned his wife in passing, always with respect, but never with warmth, never with the kind of light you'd expect from someone in love. It was a detail I tucked away, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help it. I told myself it didn't matter. He was my mentor, nothing more. He'd stay late sometimes, helping me with my writing, offering quiet encouragement that felt like oxygen in a world that often left me breathless. I'd bring him drafts of my poems, clumsy and raw, and he'd read them carefully, his brow furrowed, his pen tapping lightly against the desk. "You have a voice," he'd say, leaning across his desk, his eyes locked on mine, steady and kind, like he believed it more than I did. "Don't let anyone silence it." Those words became my anchor, something I clung to through every doubt, every failure, every moment when I felt like I wasn't enough. They carried me for years. They still do. I'd leave his office feeling lighter, stronger, like I could take on the world, like I was more than the sum of my fears. But I'd also leave with a knot in my chest, a feeling I couldn't name, because naming it would make it real, and reality was a place I wasn't ready to go. There was always something else, though, something unspoken that hung in the air between us like a held breath. A pause that lasted a beat too long, heavy with possibility. A moment when his hand brushed mine as he handed me a book, and neither of us pulled away. His fingers would linger, just for a second, warm against my skin, and I'd feel my pulse quicken, my breath catch in my throat. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, not with desire, but with something heavier, something that made my chest ache, like he was seeing parts of me I hadn't even discovered yet. It wasn't lust. It was something quieter, deeper, more dangerous. It was the kind of look that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, like the world had narrowed to just the two of you. I'd go home and lie awake, replaying those moments, dissecting every word, every glance, every silence. I'd tell myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting my own feelings onto him, that I was just a naive girl with a crush on her professor. I had to be. He was married. I was his student. It was impossible. But impossibility didn't stop the longing. It didn't stop me from writing his name in the margins of my notebook, small and hidden, in the spaces where no one would look. I'd tear the pages out later, my hands shaking, and burn them in my dorm room's sink, watching the flames curl around his name, as if that could erase what I felt. As if that could make it stop. I left that university after a year, moved to a new city, built a life. I got a job as a copywriter, then a novelist, pouring my heart into stories that never quite said what I wanted them to. I wrote about love, about loss, about the things we carry but never speak, but I never wrote about him. I couldn't. It felt too raw, too close, like putting him on the page would make him real in a way I wasn't ready for. I dated, fell in love, got my heart broken, and moved on. I told myself I was fine, that I'd left Daniel behind, that he was just a memory of a time when I was young and impressionable, when the world was still new and full of possibility. But he was always there, a shadow in the back of my mind, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. I'd see a book he loved in a store, a worn copy of the collected poems of W.B. Yeats or letters to a young poet, and feel my throat tighten, my fingers tracing the spine like it was a piece of him. I'd hear a line of poetry and hear his voice instead of mine, his quiet cadence echoing through the years, soft and deliberate, like he was still standing in front of me, reading to a room that didn't exist. I'd walk past a coffee shop and remember the time we sat there after class, talking about Frost and Plath until the sun dipped below the horizon and the barista started mopping the floors. I told myself it was nothing, just nostalgia for a simpler time, for a version of myself that didn't yet know how heavy the world could be. But it wasn't. It was him. Always him. Fast forward 20 years. I'm 42 now, single, living in a city that's become home. I've built a career, a life I'm proud of, books published, awards won, a small but loyal circle of friends who know me better than I know myself. I've filled my apartment with books and plants and soft blankets, things that make it feel like a sanctuary, a place where I can hide from the ache that's never quite gone away. But there's always been this quiet sense that something's missing, like a piece of me got left behind somewhere, and I don't know how to find it. I don't talk about it. I don't even let myself think about it most days. I've learned to live with it, to tuck it away in a corner of my heart where it can't hurt me, where it can't disrupt the life I've worked so hard to build. But then I got an invitation to a university reunion, a small gathering for alumni and former faculty. It came in the mail, a cream-colored envelope with the college's crest embossed on the front, and I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tracing the edges, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to name. I almost didn't go. I hadn't been back in years, and the idea of seeing old faces, reliving old memories, it felt like opening a door I'd worked hard to keep closed. I'd spent 2 decades building walls around that part of my life, convincing myself I'd moved on, that I was no longer that girl who sat in the back of his class, hanging on his every word. But something pulled me there. Maybe it was curiosity, a need to know if the past was as real as I remembered. Maybe it was fate, whispering that I wasn't done yet. Or maybe it was just the ache, that quiet, persistent ache, telling me I'd never really let him go. The reunion was in a dimly lit hall, all wood paneling and clinking glasses, the kind of place that felt both familiar and foreign, like stepping into a dream you haven't had in years. The air was thick with nostalgia, with the hum of laughter and conversation, old classmates swapping stories about the lives they built. I walked in, my heart pounding, my palms damp, scanning the room for a face I wasn't sure I wanted to see. I told myself I was being ridiculous. He probably wouldn't even be there. He'd be in his 60s now, maybe retired, maybe moved away to some quiet town where he read poetry to himself and forgot about the girl who used to sit in the back of his class. But then I saw him. Daniel. Older now, his hair streaked with gray, his shoulders a little stooped, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there before. But those eyes, God, those eyes were the same. Deep, searching, like they could see straight through to your soul, like they could find the parts of you you'd hidden even from yourself. He was standing by the bar, talking to someone, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his posture relaxed but attentive, the way it always was. But when he saw me, he stopped. Just stopped. Like the world had paused around us, like the noise of the room, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the hum of conversation, faded into nothing. I felt it too, that pull, that same electric charge I'd felt 20 years ago, like no time had passed at all, like we were still in that classroom, him reading poetry and me pretending not to love him. We didn't speak right away. I mingled, laughed at small talk, answered questions about my books, my career, my life. I smiled and nodded, played the part of the successful alumna, but my mind was elsewhere. I was hyper-aware of his presence across the room, like a magnet pulling at me, drawing my eyes to him even when I didn't want to look. I'd catch his gaze every now and then, and he'd be looking at me, not staring, not obviously, but enough to make my skin prickle, enough to make my heart race in a way it hadn't in years. Enough to make me wonder if I'd been wrong all those years ago, if I'd misread him, if I'd been alone in that longing. Or had he felt it too? Was I still that naive girl, reading too much into nothing, building castles out of glances and pauses? I sipped my wine, the glass cool against my lips, and tried to focus on the conversation around me, but it was useless. He was there, in every thought, every breath, every beat of my heart. Finally, he approached me. My heart was in my throat as he said my name, his voice softer than I remembered, but just as steady, just as warm, like it had been waiting for me all these years. "It's been a long time," he said, and I nodded, unable to trust my voice, afraid it would betray the storm inside me. We talked about safe things, careers, cities, the weather. I told him about my novels, how I'd finally found my voice, how I'd turned those early poems into something real. He smiled, that same quiet smile that used to make my knees weak, and said, "I knew you would." There was pride in his voice, but something else too, something heavier, something that made the air between us feel charged, like a storm waiting to break. We talked for a while, standing too close, our voices low, like we were sharing a secret no one else could hear. I could smell his cologne, the same woodsy scent he'd worn 20 years ago, and it took me back to those late afternoons in his office, the two of us bent over a poem, the world outside fading away. But there was this undercurrent now, this weight in every pause, every glance that lingered too long. I could feel it, and I knew he could too. It was like we were circling something neither of us could name, something we'd both buried but never forgotten. He asked if I wanted to step outside for some air, and I said yes before I could think better of it. My mind screamed at me to stay, to keep this safe, to walk away before I fell back into that old, dangerous longing. But my heart, my stupid, reckless heart, had other plans. Outside, the night was cool, the campus quiet, the stars sharp against the sky. We walked in silence for a while, our footsteps soft on the grass, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and old memories. The silence wasn't awkward, but it was alive, heavy with things unsaid, with 20 years of unspoken truths. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the weight of every moment we'd shared, every moment we'd let slip away. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but I couldn't find the words. They felt too big, too dangerous, like they might unravel everything I'd built. Then he stopped, turned to me, and said, "I've thought about you. More than I should have." My breath caught, sharp and sudden, like I'd been punched. I wanted to laugh it off, to say something light, to pretend I hadn't heard him. But I couldn't. Not when he was looking at me like that, like he was seeing me for the first time in 20 years, like I was still that 22-year-old girl sitting in the back of his class, hanging on his every word. His eyes were raw, unguarded, and I felt exposed, like he could see every thought I'd ever had about him, every night I'd spent wondering what might have been. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, barely steady, trembling with the weight of what I already knew. He didn't answer right away. He looked down, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders tense, like he was weighing something, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff and deciding whether to jump. The silence stretched out, heavy and unbearable, and I wanted to fill it, to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the gravity of him. Then he said, "You were different. You always were. I saw it the moment you walked into my class. You had this light, this quiet strength, this way of seeing the world that made me want to see it through your eyes. And I—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening, his eyes fixed on the ground like he couldn't bear to look at me. "I told myself it was nothing. That it was wrong to even think it. That I was your teacher, that I had a wife, a daughter, a life. I told myself I was just being foolish, that I was imagining things, that you were just a student who'd move on and forget me. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not once. Not in 20 years. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, like the world I'd built so carefully was crumbling, piece by piece. All those years, all those nights wondering if I'd imagined it, if I'd been alone in that longing, and here he was, saying the words I'd never let myself hope for. But there was no joy in it. Only pain. Only the sharp, cutting truth that he was still married, still untouchable, still a line I could never cross. And I was still the woman who'd loved him in secret, who'd built a life around a longing I could never act on. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run away, to grab him and shake him and ask why he'd kept this from me, why he'd let me carry this alone for so long. But I just stood there, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. Trying to make sense of the fact that he'd loved me too, that we'd both been carrying the same secret, the same ache, for 20 years. We stood there, the air thick with everything we weren't saying, with all the words we'd swallowed, all the moments we'd let slip away. I wanted to ask him why. Why now? Why tell me this when nothing could come of it? Why open this wound after all these years, when we'd both worked so hard to move on? But I didn't. I just looked at him, at the lines on his face, the gray in his hair, the weight in his eyes. He looked tired not just from age, but from something deeper, regret, maybe, or guilt, or the burden of carrying the same secret I had for so long. His hands were still in his pockets, his shoulders hunched, like he was bracing himself for something, like he was waiting for me to say the thing that would either save him or break him. I wanted to hate him for saying it, for breaking the silence we'd both kept for 20 years, for making this real when it could only hurt us. But I couldn't. Because I'd wanted to hear those words, even if they hurt. Even if they changed nothing. Even if they only made the ache sharper, the longing heavier. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough, like it hurt to speak, like the words were tearing something open inside him. "I shouldn't have said anything. It's not fair to you. I saw you tonight, and it all came back. Everything I felt, everything I tried to forget. I thought I could keep it buried, that I could go on pretending it didn't matter. But seeing you here, after all this time..." He shook his head, his eyes glistening, and I realized he was fighting back tears, just like I was. "It's like no time has passed at all." I felt exposed, like he'd seen every hidden thought I'd carried for 2 decades, every moment I'd spent wondering what might have been, every time I'd pushed him out of my mind only for him to creep back in. And yet I couldn't look away. I couldn't walk away. I was rooted there, caught in the pull of him, just like I'd been all those years ago, when I was 22 and the world was still full of possibilities. I wanted to say something, to tell him that I'd felt it too, that I'd carried him with me, that I'd never stopped loving him. But I didn't. Because saying it would make it real, and reality was a place where we couldn't go. Reality was his wife, his daughter, his life, a life I had no place in. "Do you love her?" I asked, my voice trembling, barely audible, like I was afraid of the answer. I didn't need to say who I meant. He knew. He looked down, his silence louder than any answer, stretching out between us like a chasm, vast and unbridgeable. I could see the struggle in his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched in his pockets. "I care about her," he said at last, his voice heavy, measured, like he was choosing each word with care. "She's my wife. We've built a life together. We have a daughter, a home, a history. But it's not—" He stopped, like he couldn't bring himself to finish, like the words were too heavy to say out loud. I wanted to scream at him to finish, to tell me what I already knew, that he'd stayed out of duty, not love, that he'd felt the same pull I had, all those years ago, that he'd been as trapped by it as I was. But I didn't. Because saying it would make it real, and reality was a weight neither of us could carry. Reality meant acknowledging that we'd both chosen safety over truth, that we'd let fear and obligation shape our lives instead of chasing what we wanted. Instead, I asked, "Why did you tell me?" It wasn't an accusation, just a question, soft and raw, like I was pleading for an answer that might make sense of this, that might make the pain worth it. He met my eyes, and for a moment I saw the man he'd been 20 years ago, the one who'd made me feel like I could be anything, like my words mattered, like I mattered. His eyes were raw, unguarded, and I felt my heart crack open, just a little, just enough to let the ache spill out. "Because I couldn't keep it in anymore," he said, his voice breaking just a little, like it was costing him something to say it. "Because seeing you tonight, it reminded me of everything I let go. Everything I didn't say. I've carried it for 20 years, and I thought I could keep carrying it, that I could keep it locked away where it couldn't hurt anyone. But I can't. Not anymore. Not when you're standing here, looking at me like that." I wanted to touch him. Just a hand on his arm, a moment to feel that connection again, to know it was real, to know that I hadn't imagined it all those years ago. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because touching him would break something in me, something I'd spent years protecting, a fragile wall I'd built to keep the longing at bay. So I stood there, my hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms, the pain grounding me, keeping me from falling apart. I could feel the ache of all the things we'd never say, never do, all the moments we'd let slip away. The air was heavy with it, with the weight of 20 years, with the truth we'd both buried but never forgotten. I wanted to ask him what he felt now, if he still felt it, if this confession was a beginning or an end. But I was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would be yes, because that would mean we'd have to face what we'd lost. Afraid it would be no, because that would mean I'd been alone in this all along. We talked a little longer, about nothing important, safe things again, like the campus, the books we'd read recently, the way the world had changed in 20 years. But every word felt like a lie, a way to fill the space where the truth should have been. It was easier to talk about nothing than to face what we just unearthed, to face the fact that we'd both loved each other and done nothing about it, that we'd both chosen silence over courage. When it was time to go, he hugged me, a brief, careful hug, like he was afraid of what might happen if he held on too long. His arms were warm, familiar, and for a moment I let myself feel it, let myself pretend that we were different people, in a different life, where we could have been something more. But then he pulled away, and the moment was gone, and I was left with the same ache I'd carried for 20 years, only sharper now, heavier, more real. I walked away, my heart pounding, my mind replaying his words, "I loved you too." I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the warmth of his voice, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. But he wasn't mine. He never had been. And I wasn't the kind of woman who broke things apart, no matter how much I wanted to. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me like a weight. I kept thinking about what might have happened if I'd said something all those years ago, if I'd been braver, if I'd told him how I felt when I was 22 and the world was still full of possibilities. Would it have changed anything? Would we have been together, or would we have just broken each other sooner? I thought about the life he'd built, the wife he went home to, the daughter who was probably in college now, maybe sitting in a classroom like the one where we'd met, reading poetry and dreaming of a future she couldn't yet see. I thought about my own life, the books I'd written, the loves I'd lost, the quiet nights I'd spent alone, always with that shadow in the back of my mind, always with him. I wondered if he'd gone home that night and lain awake too, if he'd replayed our conversation, if he'd regretted saying anything at all. I wondered if he'd meant it, if he still felt it, or if it was just a moment of weakness, a crack in the armor he'd worn for 20 years. I wondered if he'd told his wife about me, if he'd ever said my name out loud, or if I was just a secret he carried, like he was for me. I wondered if he'd wake up tomorrow and push this night to the back of his mind, like I'd tried to do so many times, or if it would haunt him the way it was haunting me. I wondered if he'd think of me the next time he read a poem, if he'd hear my voice the way I heard his, if he'd feel the same ache I did, sharp and relentless, like a wound that never quite heals. I haven't seen him since that night. I don't know if I ever will. Part of me hopes I don't, because seeing him again would mean facing this all over again, this ache that never quite goes away, this longing that's woven itself into the fabric of who I am. But part of me, God, part of me hopes I do, just to feel that pull one more time, to know it wasn't all in my head, to know that for one moment, we were both brave enough to tell the truth. His words are still with me, a quiet weight I carry everywhere, like a stone in my pocket, smooth from years of turning it over in my mind. I loved him in secret for 20 years, and now I know he loved me too. But knowing doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the choices we made, the lives we built apart. It doesn't erase the ring on his finger, or the years we've lost. It doesn't make the impossible possible. It just makes the ache sharper, the longing heavier, the silence louder. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd met at a different time, in a different life. If I'd been older, or he'd been free, or we'd both been braver. Would we have been happy? Would we have lasted, or would we have burned out, like so many loves do, leaving nothing but ashes and regret? I think about the moments we could have had, the quiet mornings, the late-night talks, the way his hand might have felt in mine, not just for a fleeting second, but for keeps. I think about the poems we could have read together, the stories we could have written, the life we could have built if we dared to try. But those are just thoughts, fleeting and useless, like leaves carried away on the wind. They don't change the truth. The truth is, some loves are meant to stay unspoken, locked away where they can't hurt anyone but you. They live in the quiet moments, in the pauses, in the spaces between what you say and what you feel. They live in the way your heart aches when you hear a certain song, or see a certain book, or walk past the coffee shop where you once sat together, talking about nothing and everything. I don't know if I'll ever stop loving him. I don't know if I want to. Maybe loving him is part of who I am now, a piece of me I can't let go of, even if it hurts. Maybe it's the price I pay for feeling something so real, so deep, that it's shaped every part of my life, even the parts one don't talk about. But I do know this, some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. So I'm telling you now, because I need to let it out, just this once. I need to say it, to give it shape, to make it real, even if only for a moment. I need to tell someone that I loved him, that I still love him, that I'll probably always love him, even if I never see him again. Have you ever loved someone you could never tell? Have you ever carried a secret that felt like it might break you, a longing that's lived in you for so long you don't know who you'd be without it? Share your story below. And if this story made you feel something unspoken, something that lingers in the quiet corners of your heart, hit that share button. Pause for a moment and reflect. What's the one choice you wish you'd made differently? What's the one secret you've never told, the one that still keeps you up at night?